Hello students, I am Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS, IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In this lecture, we are going to discuss the relationship between NGOs and donors, how NGOs function, what are NGOs, and how their relationship with donors in the form of the state, in the form of international NGOs, as well as in the form of corporate social responsibility has transformed the landscape in India as well as outside. But our main focus will be on India. So let us start. So what are NGOs? NGOs or non-governmental organizations are supposed to be non-profit, voluntary self-governing organizations that operate independently from state or market control structures. Now this happens to be a very straightforward, uncomplicated idea of an NGO, in which they have to be non-profit. If they are profit making, they cannot be NGOs. They have to be voluntary, nobody should be forced to work, and they have to be self-governing organizations, just that they have to register themselves as societies or not-for-profit societies with the government of India or specific state governments. And interestingly, when we look at these aspects, in the Indian context, we see the various kind of terminologies being used to define them. They are called as voluntary organizations, they are called as private voluntary organizations, they are called as government organizations or non-government development organizations, as well as community organizations. Now each one of them have different roles and responsibilities, but one of the structural aspects of their roles and responsibilities is to perform the role of delivering welfare services as well as speaking and seeking social justice. So this dual role can be complicated, this dual role can be uncomplicated. The uncomplicated aspect of it is that because they are voluntary in nature, they are not for profit and they are self-governing, that means there is no direct control of the state on the way these organizations function. At the same time, because they are also seeking the registration with the state can deny this registration or cancel these registrations in the case when these NGOs are not doing the favor of the state. So what we witness is that NGOs can work as voluntarist organizations, they can also work as bureaucratic organizations in which managerial practices and the professionalism triumphs over voluntary nature of work. And these are two significant specific ideas we will elaborate more in this lecture. So during the colonial period, particularly since the beginning of 19th century till the mid 20th century, the major kind of the NGOs were of two kinds. One, the Christian missionary organizations who had come to India as well as other areas of the global south, particularly to the colonies, and built their schools, hospitals, literacy programs, as well as conversion networks. So you have the missionaries of charity. You had several other missions who worked in a way to look at the poverty stricken, the lepers, so on and so forth, and their upliftment. When they came, the Indian intelligentsia, they also wanted to emulate these practices. We had reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who created organizations promoting women's education, widow remarriage and progressive legal reforms. But he was not the only one, because The Raja Ram Mohan Roy could be a pioneer in Bengal, but his ideas as well as his ways that he tried to copy from Christian missionaries were also used in Arya Samaj, were also used by several other kind of intellectuals and activists throughout the Indian subcontinent. With the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi to the Indian scene, we see Gandhian voluntarism giving a lot of emphasis to constructive work, for example, khadi production, village industries, and sanitation campaigns. And through this, Gandhi wanted to create a system or a structure of the body in the body politic of India, wherein some group of people would dedicate their lives as volunteers to the upliftment of the downtrodden, the Harijans, the villagers, as well as native industries. So here volunteers played very crucial role, both in terms of political mobilization as well as the community development activities. And if you go back to the previous slide, you will see that this political mobilization is where volunteer activist work of NGOs take their precedence. And community development activities are something that the NGOs now call as developmental NGOs, because community means rural people and how their welfare can be taken care of where state is not able to reach. So colonial era volunteerism combined welfare reform, political struggle, and established templates for post-independence civil society work. Early post-independence, particularly 1947 to late 1950s, again followed the ideas of Gandhi in terms of khadi, cooperatives, so on and so forth for rural production systems. Because rural areas, according to Gandhi, were self-governing republics, and these self-governing republics need to be made self-reliant. There should not be a lot of migration from rural to urban areas just for the sake of work. Rather, people in rural areas should live in rural areas, make productive use of the resources that are available to them, and live a more peaceful life. Religious and philanthropic organizations or NGOs also participated in terms of refugee relief, famine assistance, child welfare, and basic health services. Refugee relief, particularly in the post 1947 period as well as post 1971 period. But here, the Central Social Welfare Board of 1953 institutionalized state funding and created establishments or endorsed establishments who would work for the betterment and welfare of the communities. So, the almost decade of the 1950s, we see the NGOs becoming semi-formal developmental partners, in which they would take their legitimacy from the work that are doing on the ground in the form of community development, but at the same time they would take funds from the state to run some of these programs. 1960s and 1970s saw that there was a lot of famines, lot of droughts, as well as lot of influx of migrants happening from Bangladesh because of 1971 war, and local NGOs were trying to now see their activities not just in terms of doing Gandhi's work, but also becoming independent of Gandhi's ideas and ideologies. They also wanted to look at slum improvement, skill training, and urban development. So the role of NGOs is not or was not just about looking at what's happening in the rural areas, but also what's happening in the urban areas. Because once the people started moving from rural to urban areas, many of the issues persisted. The slum dwellers, the ones who are living in jhuggi jhopdis, the ones who are living in chawls, what is their life? What is their livelihood? How their lives and livelihoods can be sustained in a way that they have a dignified life. So this dignity was also about creation of women's groups and community health collectives for local needs as well as for participatory activism. Action groups would mobilize peasant, others for collective bargaining and collective organizing. So the political society of Partha Chatterjee, the way he is arguing, it comes from this relationship of NGOs, of state and that of the population which is on the margins. So NGOs here perform the role of less of non-governmental organizations and more of civil society organizations or community-based organizations, because community-based organizations are the organizations who are based within specific communities. If you have a community of farmers, then one NGO would be looking at those farmers themselves, how they can get proper irrigation on time, electricity, fertilizers, seeds, so on and so forth. But at the same time, 1970s also witnessed a lot of other issues in terms of political activism, about, as we had discussed in the previous lecture, about dissatisfaction with the bureaucracy, about how the bureaucracy functioned and what the bureaucracy was doing. So 1960s and 70s gave rise to a more professional idea of the NGOs, because NGOs by this time had become very dominant actors which supported the flows of funding, not just from the government but also from international organizations or international donors. Now when the international donors came, they wanted certain form of professionalism. So the volunteer networks of people who are doing social work gave rise to institutions offering courses on social work, how to make managers out of social work. For example, one institution that became very famous was Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And Tata Institute of Social Sciences, one of the most prominent courses that it offers is Masters in Social Work or MSW. And through that, you also have the PG diploma courses in rural development, where new rural managers are being trained. So this way, the professionalism becomes something that they all were looking at, and the way this advocacy NGOs started campaigning about issues that were international in character. For example, about housing rights, about environmental justice, as well as women's empowerment. It's not that these issues were not being discussed before, but with very focused funding coming from international donor organizations, empowerment of women became a crucial issue. Environmental justice became a crucial issue, because many of these donor organizations were based in Europe or based in Northern America. And in the 1970s and 1980s, that was their concern. Like in the 1990s, one of the biggest concerns was AIDS. And when it became AIDS, money flowed into it. So this is where donor-NGO relationships became very significant, because now the donors decided what kind of issues need to be addressed, how they need to be addressed, what needs to be done, and how they can be measurable, they can have measurable outputs. Now, one interesting aspect of this is that donors provide a certain kind of funding for a particular duration. Let us say this is for 5 years, and this 5 years they'll divide into 5 different sections, and these sections have to be measurable. What kind of activities have been done, and the NGOs are always on their toes to prove that they're actually doing certain kind of measurable works. So this is when something becomes target oriented, something becomes this bureaucratic. That means the focus is less on work and more on appearance of doing some kind of work. And appearance of this kind of work means that you are hiring now a number of people so that they can act as professionals, not because they really want to work there, not really because they care for the people, not really because they are concerned for the people, rather primarily because they are getting paid to show that they are concerned about these people, these individuals, these communities. So donor based ideas meant that the real problem of the local communities, even in the name of participation, was not really acknowledged. Rather, the participation would be forced from above by the ideas of the donor agencies and the donor groups when they come and visit. So, the institutional funding meant that NGOs always had to look out for projects for their very survival, and the bigger NGO it is, the more funds are required for survival. So that is another reason why NGO donor relationships are quite interesting to watch and quite interesting to follow. So as I said, donors decided what is important and what is not important. So for example, HIV and AIDS, it was considered important, not malaria, not cholera. Climate adaptation was important, but not poverty alleviation. So this also led to issues something like caste discrimination, land conflict and others not getting proper attention from the donor groups. This got exaggerated when it was when the aid became part of projects. You have certain projects, as I said, about with a certain timeline, and when they become output oriented matrices, that means that complex issues of politics and social change were reduced to the stories of empowerment. And NGOs would glorify, would recruit PR agencies, would recruit another kind of professionals who would be producing videos and photographs for them, as well as very glossy covers of annual reports to show what kind of works they are doing, even if they are not doing any work on the ground. So, but at the same time, with donors and particularly foreign donors, the pushing in a lot of money, the government did not, or the NGOs did not have to depend on the government to do the bidding all the time, and they would also not have to work with the bureaucrats all the time in order to get certain kind of fundings. So in a way, this also reduced the amount of corruption that was happening in the name of state sponsored NGOs or state sponsored work. The next aspect is that of foreign currency in Indian rupees or FCRA and CSR. FCRA is again about foreign funding. How do you get it legitimately? But also, it's also about the politics of getting FCRA approved and not somebody not getting FCRA approved. If you're doing some good work means you're doing activist kind of work for social justice, for social empowerment, then there's a possibility that this work is not being liked by certain groups of people who are affiliated to the government of the town, and this government at the national level can cancel your FCRA, and when you don't fall into line, that means your NGO might get closed. Similarly with CSR, what we see, it is part of corporate social responsibility, and corporate and social responsibility is again a source of funding for many of the NGOs. But corporate houses have their own specific ideas as well as philosophy of what they want to have. So this is also a highly tightened way of looking at efficiency, looking at how things work and how they are not working, and if something is working in a particular way, how they are working. It is about productivity, it is about showcasing certain ideas and certain networks. So CSRs are also about not speaking truth to power, because no corporate house will ever speak truth to the people in power, particularly at powerful positions in the government. In the south, in a global south country like India. So what we need to see is that the political economy of NGOs is shaped and reshaped within this framework of autonomy, sustainability and advocacy roles. And the state-society relationships, where you have state on one side, you have society on the other side, this bridge between the two was fulfilled by the community organizations or NGOs. But when the state tightens its control over the NGOs, then it is the role of the NGOs to become part of the state's enforcement mechanism and surveillance mechanism. So society becomes an alienated feature here. And this is where political sociology becomes significant, because what it does is that it looks critically at not only the role of the state, but also looks at the relationship between state, civil society and the society, and how they are interacting each other, what are the points of intersection, and if there are points of intersection, what kind of a compound is getting created at these nodes. So in an essence, NGOs have remained indispensable actors, bridging gaps in welfare delivery, rights advocacy and community empowerment across India. But at the same time, to guard their autonomy, they require funding. If they are not getting funding from the state, they need to seek funding from individuals who happen to be philanthropists. They require the funding from the international NGOs, they require funding from other places, because at the end of the day, they also have to recruit the best minds and also the people who are really interested and capable of doing some of these works. So not everybody comes to NGOs to build a career, but there are certain group of people who are coming to these NGOs and social and community welfare networks to be part of them, to do something good for the society. So accountability is very significant here, as what we witness is that NGOs can enable donors or force donors to do something that is required by the local communities. But when something becomes project oriented, that means there is a project that is being decided here, maybe in New York, and here there are 10 NGOs who are bidding to get this project. So the ideas of social welfare and working with the community, with the issues of the community, is not getting addressed here. It's the same like a bureaucratic organization in which all the decisions are being made here in an urban location, and the NGOs are only there as implementation agencies and nothing more than that. The moment they become something more than that, that means there are a lot of powerful institutions and organizations who are going to come, close all the doors and windows of its survival, and then at the end of the day, we see a demise of that NGO. And over the past 10-15 years, we have witnessed the closure of a number of NGOs who have been working for social upliftment, who have been working for social policy measures, and who have been speaking truth to power. So the balancing act is very crucial as well as fraught with a lot of difficulty. So NGOs are not just about the work, are not just a foot soldiers of a developmental regime. Rather, NGOs, the way they actually manifest in terms of non-governmental organizations or voluntary organizations, it is also their work to speak truth to power, to speak the truth that is coming from the ground, rather than just moving again and again, shopping for more and more projects so that they can remain at the top of the so-called NGO pyramid. So there's a few questions that I have presented here. You can go through some of these questions, try to answer them, and we'll discuss them further. And some of these readings are also very interesting. Thank you.